Okay, welcome. We'll go ahead and call the September 1st meeting of the Longmont Historic Preservation Commission to order. Can we have the roll, please?
Commissioner Sibley. Here. Commissioner Hardees.
Here.
Commissioner Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a quorum. We will move to, well, I would move to approval of the August 22 minutes, but I don't believe we have a quorum of members present for that meeting. We only have 3. So I think we'll defer approval of these August 4th minutes until next session. Okay, then report from the chair. I'll be brief. Just make a note that the HPC did have a joint session with City Council on August 16th to review some thoughts and considerations for code changes relative to historic preservation, and that is an ongoing discussion. So that is something that we are working through, and we appreciate staff and City Council's willingness to sit down with us and hear our perspectives. That's all I have. Communications from HPC staff liaison.
All right. So let's see, the Monday following our August meeting, I believe it was, we had we met with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board as part of their tour of their open spaces so that they could take a look at the Dickens barn property on the Zlayton Drive property. They will be discussing that as part of their board meeting on September 12th. So, and potentially taking action on whether they would like to acquire that property as that development project moves forward. We are still in the review process for that particular project. So the applicant is working through some of the economics right now, just because costs keep going up. Otherwise, that is my primary report. I will note we do have a number of members of the community here this evening who will be speaking about a project for which we have a neighborhood meeting for a possible development project in the Bond Farm area. And there's a historic farmhouse on that property that the neighbors are interested in talking to the commission about. So just wanted to give everyone a heads up as far as why we have some of these folks in the audience with us today. So that said, I will turn it over to Glenn to see if he has any additional comments.
No, I don't, other than it can't be a discussion on the project, but certainly you can hear their comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff at this point? No? Okay. All right. Thanks, staff. We will move ahead to the public invited to be heard. So I've got a list here in front of me. I will call on members of the audience that have signed up. When you come up to the podium, please state your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes for your comments. The first speaker is Kathleen Hyatt.
I have a handout. May I pass that out first?
Sure.
So I can get started while that is being passed out. My name is Kathleen Hendricks. I live at 133 Grant Street, which is just behind the Bond Farm property. I write History Colorado State Historical Fund grants for a historical building in North Boulder. And as one of the members of the neighborhood of the Bond Farm, I am very invested in trying to save this property. So I'm speaking on behalf of a group of our neighbors. We're very concerned that this historical building is likely going to be torn down. On the last page of that handout, you can see that there's a proposed plan from the developer. I've put stars on the map to show approximately where that house and the barn are. There's a lot of information on that fact sheet. I've based it loosely on the historical designation application because it seems to be the relevant information. But I'd like to just highlight a couple things for you. The property was originally the D.C. Donovan Brickyard. The D.C. Donovan house on Pratt Street has already been designated as a local landmark in the city. The house itself was built, it appears, in 1900 by the D.C. Donovan family and then moved to the Bond Farm property. So the D.C. Donovan family is pretty significant to Longmont's history. And on that farm, Bob and Irene Bond spent pretty much their entire life there, over 65 years of marriage. It was a poultry farm and a dairy farm at various points. And I think history so often overlooks the contributions of women, but Irene Bond was really significant to the community. She went back to get her LPN degree after her children graduated from college and then dedicated her life to serving fellow mastectomy patients. So she would visit them, provide the physical care that they weren't necessarily getting because there weren't follow-up appointments for physical therapy from the doctors at that time. She was honored for this service by several organizations, including the American Cancer Society. So I think Irene Bond was actually a really significant figure in Longmont's history as well. So we're asking you if you can review this fact sheet and hopefully get involved, help us save these beautiful historical buildings. We have some other members of our group have some more specific requests in this time. We're hoping with your involvement we can at least prevent the demolition from happening soon so that more research can be done, so we can see if this is a building that we can landmark with or without the developer's consent. Ideally, we would do it with their consent. Ideally, we will save the buildings altogether. We know our neighborhood is designated as an area of change, so we're not trying to prevent change or growth. We are well aware that that's going to happen, and we embrace that, but we're hoping that it can happen in a way that is going to respect the history of the neighborhood and preserve the neighborhood's namesake, the Bond Farm house and barn.
All right. Thank you. Okay, next speaker would be Chris Conklin.
My name's Chris Conklin. I live at 234 Francis Street, and I'm in the Bond Farm neighborhood. And I would like to direct the committee, if you would, to take action tonight to inform the city planner to educate the developer of the Bond Farm about the tax advantages of preserving of a landmark designation for the Bond Farm. It's a win-win situation for everybody, really. I mean, we as a neighborhood would get the historic designation, and the developer could get the tax credits. So that would be, yeah, that's probably it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next up in public invited to be heard would be Jerry Walther. Oh, you don't have to. No worries, you don't have to. Okay, next then would be Bob Mclaughlin.
I have a handout as well. And Jennifer, if you would keep one of these for yourself also. My name is Bob Mclaughlin. I live at 620 Emory Street, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the historic East Side neighborhood. I watched the tape of the August 16th study session between HPC and council. Hence, our neighborhood supports the lateral move of HPC code into the Land Development Code Title 15. We support strengthening the demolition ordinance, including a section on demolition by neglect. And we support ADUs in our neighborhood that are designed to echo the themes of our pre-1940 architecture. Henna is concerned about several issues that came up in that meeting. One is creating historic preservation overlays that are one lot in size. We believe this is completely unworkable and leads to a hodgepodge in the neighborhood. Design guidelines that apply only to HPOs are unacceptable, and we do not believe that ADUs should be exempt from design guidelines. They can be accommodated just like every other structure. What do we want in the historic East Side? A mechanism that establishes a conservation overlay district that applies to the entire residential neighborhood. All homes would be treated equally. It protects the continuity of the view from the street. Front elevations remain. Additions and ADUs are located in the rear. It provides flexibility to reconfigure housing to meet a family's changing needs. New construction should echo the architectural patterns from our early development, and it should foster cooperation among neighbors rather than creating animosity due to different rules for different lots. The Henna proposal that has been handed out to you tonight was submitted to the city a year ago. This proposal is not targeted at historic preservation. Instead, it fosters neighborhood conservation through land use guidelines. It would apply to all properties zoned RSF within the historic East Side neighborhood. It does not conflict with Longmont's Historic Preservation Code or create additional work for HPC. Except for historically designated properties, reviews would be done by staff. This proposal does not create new or more restrictive measures. From the mid-'80s until 2018, the RLE zone covered the same land area and required that new development reflect the established patterns in the neighborhood. It has only been since 2018 that our neighborhood has had no architectural guidelines. This proposal builds on the RLE concept by identifying specific criteria that foster a sense of place. It allows great flexibility and accommodates existing patterns. I know of no properties within the existing East Side built prior to 1940 where the architecture does not fall within these guidelines. The proposal set expectations. I believe that this document has been given to ADU applicants during pre-application conferences. If I might just finish.
You can finish.
As a result, the last two ADU projects in the neighborhood have followed these guidelines and have had strong support from Henna. These guidelines have proven to be an effective approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next is Ms. Sharon O'Leary.
Good evening, HPC. Sharon O'Leary, 534 Emory Street, co-chair of the Historic East Side Neighborhood. I'm here tonight to, oh gosh, trying to cut me off already. You know, did I overstay my welcome? One can only hope. Somebody run a timer behind me. I just don't trust them. Okay, well, at least I got the beginning out of the way. Start. I'm here tonight to address three things. First, the proposed ADU that you will review tonight. Although cars and garages were not built when this historically designated home was, the homeowner's outstanding plan integrates all historical aspects needed to blend the presently awkward garage into a timely, sensitive structure, supporting an ADU into an historically designated home. This is exactly what the Historic East Side neighborhood is striving for. We appreciate the thoughtful time, consideration, and expense that homeowner put into their plan. We strongly support designs that are sensitive to Longmont's oldest neighborhood's integrity. We hope that you would support a project like this. Next, I am greatly concerned about Henna still not having a conservation overlay zone as promised. The reason the historic East Side neighborhoods is the largest intact neighborhood in the city of Longmont is because of our 30-year prior zoning. During that time, the west side had different zoning, hence a different look and not an intact neighborhood. If the commission, city planners, and city council try to come up with a one-size-fits-all for both neighborhoods, it will not work. It's like trying to design a glove that fits both the right hand and the left hand. It will not work. So please move forward with the original overlay plans that were submitted to the city from the historic East Side neighborhood as just a starting block. You don't have to recreate the wheel. Finally, I'm just checking in on the progress regarding demolition code and discussions on demolition by neglect. If needed, I would request that you meet a little longer or maybe have a HPC retreat to create the groundwork for quicker and thoughtful process. I honestly appreciate everything you do. It just seems like maybe there's not enough time, and carving out a retreat might help move some things forward, but I appreciate what you do, and welcome Councilman Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you. New batteries. All right. That's all I had on my list. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come up? Please just come up and state your name and address.
Hello, my name is John Loughran. I live at 220 Sherman Street. And as the commission is working to preserve the historic nature of the buildings and community, I would like to ask that they consider also the temporary vinyl banners and structures at the West Side Tavern. So some of those structures, which are deemed temporary, have been up for a couple of years and are, say, contributing to some of the traffic issues, but also I would say that they detract from the historical nature of the buildings and neighborhoods. So I'd ask you to take them into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you all for your comments and for coming down here this evening. Okay, I probably should have done this at the very beginning, but we have two items on our agenda for public hearings. I'd like to propose that we switch the order of the agenda. As I understand it, our second one is going to be a smaller. So I would propose by motion that we switch the order and make our Carlson Farm our second item and 329 Fifth Ave our first. Okay. All right, moved and seconded, moved by Commissioner Jacoby, seconded by Commissioner Hardees. All in favor? Aye. All right, motion passes unanimously, so we'll move ahead to 329 Fifth Ave, certificate of appropriateness, from what I now understand to just be limited to porch alterations.
Yes, so just as an update, originally this certificate of appropriateness addressed porch alterations as well as construction of a new accessory dwelling unit and garage. The garage is still in the works. There are just some potential design changes that are under consideration as we resolve some possible conflicts between historic preservation code as well as the accessory dwelling unit code. So zoning and historic preservation staff, we're going to have a meeting of the minds next week and figure out how we can move this forward, but we didn't feel comfortable bringing the garage to the commission with changes that had not been seen yet. So tonight, we're going to ask that you only address the porch alteration. at 329 Fifth Avenue. I'm going to go through what they're looking to do as well as our staff recommendation. I will ask the applicant to come up and speak about what they're proposing as well. So this property is located at the southeast corner of Emerson and Fifth Avenue. It is a single-family house. There is currently an existing single-story garage at the rear of the property. Emery, did I say Emerson? I'm sorry. It's been a long week, sorry. So the request is to replace, this is the HS Webb home. It was built in 1907. It was designated a local landmark in 2019. They are requesting to replace non-historic deteriorating porch columns and railings that were installed probably sometime in the 50s or 60s. They're the kind of curly Q cast iron variety, with wood columns and a knee wall consistent with the original historic style. The original columns were round and slightly tapered. They are proposing square columns that are consistent with the overall vernacular style of the home. Staff does recommend approving the porch alterations as proposed. At this point, I'm going to let the applicant, Mr. Stone, would you like to speak about your, about the railings and the condition and the style that they currently are in? And so I have a few of your slides if you wanted to split through there, just on particular to the railing.
Good evening, my name is Tim Stone, and I do live at 329 Fifth Avenue. Been there just shy of 4 years, and our goal when we bought the home was to honor the heritage of the house and try to preserve it pretty much as the original architecture. And one of the things that stood out to us immediately was the wrought iron railing in the front. In preparation for our application, I did a little bit of work on the front porch, and mostly because we recognized that the one of the posts was penetrating the support system on the roof, as you can see there on the slide on the right, and it's beginning to fail. And just below that, at the base, you can see that the railing is rusted, deteriorated significantly. And the cause of that is that the previous homeowner had overlaid new decking over the original decking. And it was, these posts are encapsulated now, and so when moisture collects around it, it has no way to dry. And so rust begins to develop. And as best I can tell, most of them are starting to rust. This is the worst one, right at the very front of the house. At the top of the stairs. Whatever the decision is here, in terms of meeting the historical appropriateness, this railing system has to be replaced in one fashion or another. The roof is sagging. The front porch does have some sag to it. And so our goal at this point, since we know some work has to be done, is to try to preserve as much as possible the original architecture of this house, which has been our goal from day one. And in fact, the house was recently painted. It's now white, which was its original color as we know it, probably 7 colors later. I am a licensed general contractor with the city of Longmont, and I do intend to do the work myself. The integrity of the knee wall and new columns will be significantly greater than the existing one now. I intend to put in 6-inch Douglas fir posts and reinforced underneath if needed. We won't do any demolition until our request has been approved. Happy to answer any questions you have. There's another slide there. It's just a kind of a crude rendering of what this would look like. The knee wall would be 24 inches high, and a new handrail would be built as well. The siding would match the house. That's cedar lap siding that you're looking at.
Okay, thank you. Any commissioner questions for the applicant? Go. There we go. All right. Red means go. Red means go. So I'm glad you're preserving the historic integrity of the home. And being a contractor, you would know better than I. I was just curious. It looks like this photo, the original porch had round columns, and you're thinking of putting in square ones. Is there a big cost difference, or why the change?
There is a cost difference. If we were to do round ones, we'd likely try to source them as original solid wood, which is expensive and very difficult to find. I would not want to put in replicas of fiberglass or something of that nature. It's not uncommon to see the square posts. They're prevalent throughout the east side. So while it doesn't take it back to its original design, it gets it very close and consistent with what we see in the neighborhood. We may have another
Thank you.
slide that shows some other homes, or not.
I don't have
Okay,
any.
that's fine.
Those are
Yeah.
the ones I was saying.
Yeah.
Any
There are a
other-
couple of homes on Collier just around the corner from us that I had presented and taken pictures of that show the type of square posts that we'd like to use.
Other questions from the commission?
Am I on? I'm okay with the square posts, and my only opinion might be, it looks like there's, like you've got black and white, and this, is that what you're thinking on that, or is that just like the drawing on the side there?
Well,
On
the
side?
house does, since it's been repainted, the trim on the windows and the eaves and so forth, we did accent in black.
Okay.
And so we just want to continue with that theme.
Okay.
But the predominant color of the knee wall is white.
Okay,
And the current railing is black, completely black,
Okay.
the wrought iron.
okay, all right, thank you.
It's also very difficult to paint.
Well, I will say, and this is really just a style opinion, but if it was me, I would probably just do those columns one color, either black or white.
Oh, I'm sorry.
'Cause
I
it's a bit
apologize.
stripey.
Let me address that. The columns would be white completely. The
Gotcha,
only-
so it's
the
just
only
like
reason,
the
yeah, you
drawing.
see lines there only because they would blend in with the rest of the house. So, yes, to answer your question, the columns will be 100% white.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions? I just have one. You are not, you're only seeking a certificate of appropriateness. You're not asking for any tax credit dollars or anything like that as part of the
It's
application?
not necessary for this project.
Okay. If you were, that would probably push you into, more of a push towards the original round columns and more of a restoration.
Sure, yeah,
But if you're not, then there's a little less restriction
certainly.
associated. Okay. Great. If there are no other questions for the applicant, I would open up the public hearing portion.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this project? Yes, ma'am. Please again state your name and address when you begin.
Sarah Levison, 634 Emory. I'm a neighbor about a block and a half away, and I have 4 columns for him that are round. No, we were in a similar situation where the original porch on our house was, the front porch was torn off because it had rotted, and they had only left the side porch. So when we did an exterior painting and we didn't do a certificate of appropriateness or anything, we had new columns fabricated out of Washington State that were the same or nearly the same as the others. But I have 4 columns in storage in my garage that I'd be willing to sell you. And they even have, actually, you could, after we ordered our new ones that were almost the same shape and size, we found out that the hardwood store on just off of South Main near the railroad tracks, they would fabricate them for about the same amount of money. So you got probably 4, and you need, what, 2 more, right? 3 more. So, yeah, you got more than half. But we'll talk after the meeting. But I would advocate, going to the round columns. They're not hard to source.
Thank you.
Sharon O'Leary, 534 Emery. I'm right up the street, and the house next door to me also, 530 Emery. We all have round columns on Emery Street. Any porch has round columns on Emery Street, so I would suggest going for the tax credit if money's the problem, but investigate further because it would replicate the authentic home, and that sounds like what the owner's striving for. But even more so, it would fit in with the integrity of at least that block, if not the whole neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this agenda item? No? We'll go ahead and close the public comment. So I will open it up for discussion among the commissioners. Here we go. Commissioner Hardee's.
Just after listening and looking at this more carefully, unless there is a staggering difference in cost, I'd have to say, the round columns would be the better choice.
Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's not red.
It is red.
Try again.
Now?
Yeah, request there we go. All right, your mic should be on,
And it's red now.
but not red around.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Does that work? Okay. I was just saying that after listening to the comments and looking at this more carefully, that unless it is a really big difference in cost, it clearly would be a better solution to go with the round columns if they can be obtained. And hopefully it's not, a huge difference in cost, but for the sake of the home and the neighborhood and your own property value, I'd say that's a better choice.
Any other comments among commissioners? I don't, for myself, given what they're asking for, I don't necessarily think the square is inappropriate. I wouldn't deny a certificate of appropriateness for a square column in this particular case. I can understand the round being a better choice, and so I'm comfortable with an approval with a recommendation to use round if possible, for my sake. Go ahead.
I'm just looking at the picture of 437 Collier, this cute cottage that's up a couple of houses from mine, and it's got square columns. And it's a beautiful porch, and I'm questioning whether it was rebuilt. My porch, I'm on Collier as well, has round columns, but it was rebuilt. And I believe my original porch had square columns. So I'm with you, Steve. I don't see it as an overwhelming, it's not a game changer to put square columns on, but I agree with the rest of you in that round columns are original. Round columns are predominant on Emery. I would prefer round columns.
Okay, Commissioner Sibley, any comments, or if not, we'll.
Yeah, I know I've seen both. I mean, when I look at it, again, I'd probably prefer the round, but I'm not opposed to the smaller square. Especially when you look at 437, they're a little less chunky than some of the more modern things that I'm seeing happening. And so I'm thinking if they're in proportions similar to that, they kind of lend themselves to that same look that the round had. So.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
I would move that we approve certificate of appropriateness for the design changes for the porch with a recommendation to consider circular columns.
Thank you.
I would second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Jacoby and seconded by Commissioner Sibley. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. No. Any opposed? None. So motion
Chair.
passes unanimously for the certificate of appropriateness for the porch only, and we'll look forward to seeing the other part of this come back. Does you have a?
Well, what I might suggest is maybe you continue the portion of the garage to your
Ah.
next regular meeting.
So that you don't need,
So we don't
further-
need to
further
advertise and
advertisements.
send notice and everything again.
okay, okay. All right, so I'll just go ahead and move that we do table the second half of this, the accessory dwelling unit, to the next HPC. Okay, do I have a second? Okay, so that's moved by Commissioner Lane, seconded by Commissioner Jacoby. All those in favor? Aye. And opposed? None? All right, motion is unanimous. We will table the second half of that till our October HPC. Thanks.
Will the neighborhood be notified
Uh,
ahead of the meeting? We were for this original.
So from a process standpoint, if you're continuing a public hearing, it does not need to be renoticed. It will be an agenda item on this meeting, but we already did notice this public hearing. So from a procedural standpoint, we would not need to renotice it.
But the design plans will be the same, correct?
Let's have the conversation here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
S-
Well, I'm happy to clarify after the hearing, if you have questions. Okay. All right. So we'll move on to our other public hearing item, the Carlson Farm, 1901 South Main. You have a staff report for that?
I do.
Great.
This is this relates to an item that, a certificate of appropriateness that this commission approved back in April of 2021. This is a two-part application. This would be an amendment to the landmark status to basically take the landmark status and apply it specifically to the historic structures rather than the property as a whole. We'll get into the rationale for that momentarily. And then also a certificate of appropriateness for design guidelines for new development on this property, as was the condition of the certificate of appropriateness granted back in April of 2021. So in terms of vicinity map, this property is just southwest of the intersection of South Main Street and Pike Road. It is an approximately 1 acre site. It's actually a little bit more than 1 acres. At the time of the historic survey, it consisted of 6 structures, a farmhouse, a garage, a barn, a shed, chicken coops, and storage buildings. The farmhouse, which was built in 1910, was designed in the classic cottage style. It was designated a historic landmark in 1997. So, as I mentioned, in April 2021, there was a certificate of appropriateness taken up by this commission. It was a certificate of appropriateness to move the historic structures to the eastern portion of the property to facilitate development of the western portion of the property. A condition of that particular certificate of appropriateness approval was that the applicant submit a subsequent COA with more details about the proposed new structures. As part of this application, the applicant has submitted proposed design guidelines for new residences for HPC approval. The applicant will be going through these guidelines in more detail. So in terms of some procedural items, the applicant is pursuing a separate application for development to replat this property into 6 parcels. The landmark status applies to the property as a whole as opposed to the individual structures. So in discussions with staff as far as how to keep the plat as clean as possible for future title search, for future title search and clean title options, felt it was appropriate to modify the landmark status so that it specifically applied to the historic structures as opposed to the full 1+ acre parcel. So, since I know we have some commissioners who were not here in April of 2021, this was the approved location. This map is, let me make this a little bigger. I just realized that. Give me a second. All right. So, you can see on this particular map, shows the original locations and where they would be moved. So basically there would be a fairly large parcel known as Lot 6 adjacent to Main Street, and that is where the historic properties, the historic farm properties would be relocated. The farmhouse would stay in its original setting, as far as I can, let's see, yes. And then the applicant would replat the property here. This is the proposed plat. We're still working through some of the details of it, but so the draft plat, you can see the larger Lot 6, and that is where the historic structures would be moved as approved in the Certificate of Appropriateness from April 2021. And then the property would be replatted to include 5 additional lots. So staff is recommending approval of the design guidelines proposed by the applicant consistent with condition number 1 of the Certificate of Appropriateness that was approved on April 8th, 2021. This packet, the COA package from this particular meeting in 2021 was included with the overall package for your background information. We also recommend approval of the request to amend the landmark designation to clarify that the designation applies to the historic structures that would then be moved to Lot 6 of the proposed plat. Again, this is essentially a clarification and a cleanup amendment for the landmark status. With that, let me get to the applicants. Get Mr. Bestall's information pulled up here. Aha. What am I looking at full screen? There we go. Jack, I'm going to turn this over to you. You should just be able to scroll through.
Thanks. Good evening. Good to see some of you again. Good to see the new people as well. Jack Bestall, I represent the owner of this, and I'm also the planner on the project. I have a little bit of overlap with Jennifer's presentation, but I think that some of this is background that maybe is useful just to create some context. This was a slide that we looked at and discussed in 2021. We were looking for a way to preserve and sustain the buildings and to create kind of a base for that with new development, if you will, and an HOA that would be able to support that. So we talked about intermingling or clustering, and that was accepted with a yes, and just in terms of our informal discussion that evening. The relocation, is that an option? That was a yes. And then is increasing to 6 from 2 residential units acceptable? That was kind of it was also a yes, obviously conditioned on how it was done. And then what about contemporary forms? Some of you may remember I was bold enough to bring forward a Robert Venturi home that he had designed for his mother. And there was some frowning, there was some smiling, but there was some frowning as well. But kind of how far can you go, especially when this is kind of the transition parcels between the Carlson farmhouse and Prospect, where I have a lot of respect for the design review committee there and so forth, but it's a little bit of an anything goes. And there's bright colors right next to this parcel on the west side. So, we've been kind of grinding on this to figure out what to do.
And we knew we needed to come back to you, discuss this, and we do request that you approve the two issues we have this evening before you. So, new buildings should not compete or contrast dramatically and be of compatible scale. So our purpose is to reconfigure the historic area. I think of it as the area of Lot 6, but tagging the historic buildings, I think, is the key, because the historic designation shouldn't apply to the new structures, and there's a series of things that could occur that would really be difficult legally, et cetera, so I appreciate your consideration of that. The design guidelines really create a framework, and we're trying to establish, we have not yet had a builder step up and take this on. It would be nice to walk in here and show you contemporary farmhouse, or, something that really fits. And there are some really good designs out there, in contemporary, so-called contemporary farmhouse type structures, for example. But we don't have that. And what we want to do is establish this with this plat process we are now going through. So the design guideline approach is what we're presenting to you this evening. So, they shouldn't compete or contrast, as we discussed. The reconfiguration, of course, was to move these buildings over to the Carlson House. The diagram that Jennifer showed was the one with the arrows that I had originally. And that was, they said no to that. That's okay. No, but they said, no, these need to be kind of in context to each other when they do slide over. And so this is the historic survey and where things are located. And so we are moving these in the plan, they're moving directly to the east. And there's a slight, the only one that's not being moved is the shed, and it would not remain. To be, as they say, totally transparent, I can show you why. This PD, that we had an amendment of the final development plan that was approved and we worked through, so that we do have the ability to have 6 residential units there, one of those being the Carlson House. And you can see the historic buildings here in dashed lines. That's actually a part of that graphic. This is a diagram that shows the existing condition that you just saw in the survey. And, there's a driveway, for example, that goes out here now that will not be allowed because of its distance to Main Street. Here's the Carlson House. The shed is right here. And what we're proposing in the plat is this. So this shows the buildings moved over with the same orientation, with the exception of that small shed. And then this shows the 5 lots that make up for the 6 total. These would front towards Pike, just like the Carlson House fronts towards Main. And then we're servicing these with access from the alley, and we're working with the 4th filing to have access from Satisfaction Circle. We also, there are some things to work out, as Jennifer mentioned, but that's really the concept for the plan and how this fits together. Mentioning it earlier, here's the barn now, here's what's going on over at Prospect, and the Bright building is now just behind this over at Prospect, so the transition is important. I really like this, speaking of round columns, I like this particular black and white photo that's taken from the survey before this porch was enclosed. It's interesting that the survey says that it's classic cottage, and then that's crossed out, and there's a penciled in classic revival. So I prefer to go with revival, but I think both are appropriate. This is an example of probably what we looked at earlier, or in our previous meeting. It's really an exemplar of classic revival, which, is close, but this certainly is a little more pristine. It's had a lot of work done on it, I'm sure. So in putting that together, that's the background for being able to isolate the historic designation to Lot 6 to the historic buildings. And then we put together a set of design guidelines. And you have this, we don't have to read it word for word, but essentially, what we're trying to do is derive from the buildings that are there, predominantly the farmhouse itself, and look at a design that provides scale and features compatible with historic buildings. And we had a really, I thought, useful discussion at our last meeting where, we're not trying to replicate, but we're also not trying to go so far away that we get out of scale. And these are the buildings that we're talking about that were in the survey that we've discussed earlier. So there's really two sets of traditional compatible types and derivative types and styles that I drew on that would be useful as establishing a framework for a future builder or designer of a custom home in either case. The national style, a little less known. It reminds me of a two-story prairie, as a matter of fact, but it has the scale and the features and the massing, I think, that would be appropriate. The bungalow, I don't think, that one's probably at the heart of it. Another traditional style, the colonial revival, if done simplistically, would have the capability of matching up well with the cottage or revival style of the Carlson. Craftsman, I think, should also be another exemplar in the design guidelines. And then we looked at derivatives, and the derivatives really are, you've seen these before. The modern farmhouse, the one on the lower, is very similar. This also is a good example. Modern craftsman has taken on different forms, but can be a useful example. This is the modern salt box, much like the barn. This happens to be a Scandinavian example, but there's many that are like this. And then the salt box also can take on this, where they've added the piece to the old barn. There's more windows in this form, but it would be, I think, compatible. So we believe the design guidelines really match up with applicable standards of the commission. And we ask for your approval of the guidelines and the historic designation being isolated to the buildings on Lot 6 through a certificate of appropriateness. And be glad to answer questions or discuss.
Thank you. Questions from Commissioner for the applicant?
Hearing none? Chairman, they must feel really positive about this.
I do have a couple of questions, and while others are ruminating. One of my questions was clarifying exactly where the lot line, well, I guess I'll back up for a second. The original proposal showed 4 lots, 4 new lots, plus the, what were we calling the conservation piece?
Yes.
And this proposal does show 5. Now, there was discussion at that April 21 hearing about a possible ADU, at the barn that is now off the table. Yes, or is
Yes.
that, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're correct in all those comments. What happened was we had really hoped to hang on to this driveway. And so by the removal of the driveway, there was additional room for a lot, and that we feel is supportive and really creates a nice series of porches towards Pike. And the 5th lot, if you will, of the new homes would be taking the place of any idea of an ADU in the barn, which I know the commission was opposed to.
Well, I don't know that it was an outright opposal, but just a cautionary tale as to how that could go. So my follow-up is, since you brought up the driveway, that was another question. It's not clear because the plat doesn't really show it, but in the presentation that we reviewed back in April, that back line of the existing house lot was the eastern edge of the driveway. Is that still where that is? In other words, I'd like to know that the original lot didn't get any smaller.
It did not. It's very close. You're speaking of the west property line?
Correct.
Yeah, it's very close to that. It was, these we held to a fairly narrow standard, 51 feet, 52, in order to make this as whole as possible. It does suffer a little bit from the setback. There's a fairly substantial setback from Main Street. And right now, in order to get water and sewer in here and a few other things, there's some discussion about bringing the alley all the way through. We know buildings can't be placed in this area, but we're pretty much opposed to the idea of an alley being an everyday occurrence on, as a part of that. So, and we'd like to maintain that as part of the Carlson lot. So, but that's something that's more a part of the civil engineering aspect of the plat.
It is, I guess, but I did want to bring that up because that was the other thing that showed up, this 30-foot easement, and I'm wondering how absolute that is, because of course, we can say it's not our intention or desire to have an alley through there, and then all of a sudden there's an alley through there, and that lot just got about a third narrower than it was when we said we could push all these buildings onto it, even though we didn't really love the whole idea. Now we're losing potentially another third of the lot, so that is a concern that I have.
Chairman Lane, we share that concern. We did not submit it in that way. What we submitted was an easement along the back of the lots for utilities and a driveway. And we submitted, you can see the kind of the gray-blue drive there. We ran it right to the edge of that lot. So the lot itself maintained its integrity. I've told Jennifer we're gonna go back and try to discuss this with Public Works. And we think it's the same difference, but it has a whole lot more. If we are able to restrict the daily, it makes a tremendous difference for the integrity of the Carlson farmhouse lot. And, if you wanted to approve the historic designation, compactness with a condition like that, it would certainly help the applicant's case.
Okay, fair enough. I probably have another question or two, but I won't hog the mic. And other commissioners? Commissioner Sibley?
So just to, can you clarify, so we're not wanting the drive or the alley to go all the way through. So if it doesn't go through, then there's just that small section that is driveway? Is that what I'm understanding, or am I missing part of this? I'm sorry.
Chairman Lane, Commissioner Sibley, when you say that small part, are you speaking to this area here?
Yeah.
Or this stub here?
So the dash line that goes around.
Yes.
And curves, so that's what what you're wanting to avoid.
Right, I think there's a need to have a driveway, a driveway for this lot.
Gotcha.
And the way that the historic buildings, were preferred to stay in relation to each other. This is, I think this is the equipment shed, which is like a large, long carport, essentially. So I think that accessing through this area by the owner of the Carlson Farm, Lot 6, certainly would happen. But there's also opportunities here and water and sewer will come in this way. Water is looping down from a utility perspective. It's looping. So we've been able to really do a cooperative effort with the fourth filing and their current efforts. So, but my only thought is that this doesn't need to be an alley onto this. There can be a driveway, and this could be stubbed. This could be even an EVA, an emergency vehicle access. And this is not, this distance is less than what fire code would require. They wouldn't allow something over 150 feet. Well, we're 112 feet or something from center here. So that was our goal, was to get proper access, but to try to maintain the integrity of the Carlson lot as much as possible.
So the drive will come one way or the other, hopefully, to go into that property, but I got you. I just want to make sure I was understanding.
Yeah, and there are alternates. So this actually shows I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't trying to jump in again. This shows really what we proposed, and what has been suggested is no easement, about the same distance, but moving the road down towards this property line, but having it come all the way through. And so that's a discussion point that we're going to take up with Public Works and Planning.
Other commissioner questions? I've got a couple others. Back in April, we had talked about this eastern chunk as a conservation area, and when we're now talking about moving the designation, the landmark designation from the property to just the buildings, I guess my thinking was that we might end up with a conservation easement on Lot 6 or some way to protect any further just any further changes, significant changes to that property, right? So we landmark these buildings, and we don't really address the property, and we've allowed this to happen. You know, could somebody come in and say, well, you know, it's landmarked, but would like to do X, Y, Z. So I'm wondering if the applicant would be open to a conservation easement on Lot 6 once these buildings are moved there.
Maybe. Conservation easements have their own, and this commission knows that more. But we were thinking that Lot 6 would be designated as the historic landmark, the local historic landmark designation. We weren't thinking of individual buildings. Staff has presented this as individual buildings. So you saw I was kind of slurring it together. So we definitely think Lot 6 should be the local designated historic property, if you will. I just hadn't gone as far as a conservation easement and the implications it might have for a future owner. But I mean, it's not that we would be opposed to that. I think we would consider it.
Well, I appreciate that. I'd like you to, just as time moves on, and you know, it's sort of one of these death by 1,000 cuts sort of scenarios over time. This is a big move. Any rate, and especially because of that easement. Oh, and so then, would there be any further? So we've already issued a preliminary COA. This would be another COA. Do we get a COA do we get a plan, a site plan coming back here that shows us the actual final proposed locations of these moves? Because that's not part of this right now.
And that could be certainly be a condition of this particular process.
Right. And in the April hearing, we had talked about asking for architectural drawings. So what you're basically really doing here is proposing the guidelines as a substitution to, in other words, as long as, if we approve the guidelines here, then when a lot gets developed and a home gets designed, that review happens strictly with the new HOA and would not come back in front of this commission.
That's correct.
Okay.
In terms of having, are you suggesting an exhibit like this on your first point?
Yeah, at some point, I mean, there's
Yeah.
going to be a site plan that
Yeah.
would be the proposed site plan for this
Right.
Lot 6, and I think it would be appropriate
Yeah,
at a minimum that come to this commission.
Yeah, Chairman Lane, we think this is it. I mean, you know, there's some refinements to do in terms of the access on the south side, but this, we believe, is very close to that site plan, and we certainly could paper the COA with an exhibit that indicates this. I mean, that's what we actually did before when Jade was still here. there was a decision made, and then we papered it, documented that. I think she may have discussed that with you. So we could do the same thing here.
Okay.
This could be the exhibit. We're very close to it.
Yeah, I mean, I would like this, I think for myself, I would like to see something formal, right? I mean, there will be a final document, not a sketch. That's
Right.
even if it's a condition that staff must take a look at this and sign off, the historic preservation liaison for staff reviews it and says, okay, there are no substantial differences, therefore we're fine, but there's some level of check in that process.
This is actually the site plan of the preliminary plat that we've submitted. I just created the sketch so you could read it a little bit better. But that's actually a CAD drawing that's going through the process. So.
Okay, great. Well, that wasn't in our packet, so
Right.
that's one of the reasons why I was
I
asking.
understand.
Okay. Okay. If there are no other questions for the applicant, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this particular agenda item? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and open it up for discussion among the commission. I had a lot to say there. I'm curious what your all your thoughts are.
have a question. I don't know, since we're talking about, squishing these historic buildings into one property, and then having the stretch of the 5 home sites, and I will say, if this moves forward, I like the idea of, the architecturals that he had shown, the different examples, and I like the idea of it linking and blending between the historic property and the neighborhood next to it. If we were to approve this, I guess I'm a little worried about it. Just it feels like it might be jammed up against where that first house would be, or last house, the lot 5. So I don't know. I mean, to your question, Steve, when you were talking about, would we have any input or anything about what those setbacks might be to the property lines, or how big those houses are up against that, those barns and things like that. I don't know if how much that goes to us, or maybe that's more for city planning and zoning. But I guess that would be a question.
Right. What would the setbacks be on those new lots?
I would have to go back and do a little bit of research, but they would have to meet the city, our city standards. Oh, it is? Yeah.
It's a specific plan development for Prospect, so, yeah, it has some very different requirements.
Right.
So, yeah, we'd have to look at it.
So it would be more like Prospect, or I'm sorry, I didn't catch all of what you said.
I believe it's tied into the same PD, so.
Okay, so it would be that same.
It would be held by those rules.
And as a 5,000 square foot lot, you're probably not going to have a particularly beefy setback on the sides, otherwise you wouldn't have a building left. So it's likely that lot 5, which is really the one that matters, I suppose, is going to have a fairly small setback on that eastern edge, which is a little different because we did have originally, in the initial application, it was an alley, right? So there was space.
Just open visual space.
So what we're being asked to act on, if I understand things correctly, is an approval of the design guidelines proposed, a an amendment of the landmark designation from the entire property to something else, I would be more inclined to say Lot 6 as a whole rather than specifically buildings. And then add whatever other thoughts we might deem appropriate. So let's just take it one at a time. Are there any comments from commissioners on the design guidelines? I mean, are there any issues or concerns in the guidelines? Rick, did you want to?
Oh, there we go. No, I don't have any specific concerns about the guidelines as presented. I was just going to make a motion to change the landmark designation from the original full lot to just Lot 6, rather than to buildings, but to Lot 6 with the moved buildings on the site.
Okay. Are you making a formal motion here?
Yes.
Okay. So just as a note, that's one of two things, right?
I could, the other
Do we want to
motion-
handle this as separate line item? I don't know why this is doing that. Separate line items? Is that okay? if we do that?
That's how staff would recommend that we do address these as separate line items.
Okay. Okay, so there's a motion on the table to amend the landmark designation to Lot 6.
With the buildings moved as planned, as presented.
Right, with the buildings moved per the requirement of the original COA approval. That's correct. Okay, so I have a motion from Commissioner Jacoby, seconded by Commissioner Sibley. Any further discussion? I would like at some point to get a recommendation for a conservation easement in one of these. And I would also like well, if the board is so inclined, I'd like a formal statement that we would not support an alley access running through that proposed easement. And it feels like this is the right portion to address that, so I'm not as sharp on the Roberts Rules of Order. We have a motion and a second, so I think we have to act on that formally. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you can ask for a friendly amendment.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah, you can amend the motion.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's been a while since. Okay, so I would request a friendly amendment of that motion to add both those components. That we recommend the applicant strongly consider a conservation easement on Lot 6, and that we note as a commission that we do not support the creation of an alley through the access easement as proposed on the south side of Lot 6. Or would... I would second the amendment. Or accept it, yeah.
Okay, I would accept that amendment. You want to re-seconds?
Yes, I will re-second, yes.
That's 4 instead of 2. That's 2 seconds. Never mind.
Thank you for throwing that in.
Okay, so we have an amended motion on the floor. I think Maria, do you have that pretty well? I don't need to say it all over again. Thank you, because that would take another 10 minutes. Okay, with a motion on the floor, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. That motion carries unanimously. So we still need to act on the design guidelines. So we need a second motion if there's no further question or discussion about it.
I'll try to do this without having to amend anything, right? So I'm just a little concerned is that when you put 5 lots on there, they're smaller, and I like the design guidelines. I'm not sure how you're gonna make a house fit on a smaller lot that would fully meet that, but that's the purveyance of architects and planners. I'm just here to say whether I like that idea, and I do like that, and so I would move that we support the guidelines as presented.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve the design guidelines by Commissioner Jacoby and seconded by Commissioner Hardees. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. That motion also carries unanimously. Thank you for your time and for bringing this application in front of us.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to new business, which we don't have any of beyond what we've already taken care of tonight. Prior business, we have 3 items on that list. The first being the Dickens Barnes Latin property update.
Yes, I mentioned that briefly in my staff report, and again, we continue to work with the applicant. We are going to be meeting with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board on the 12th of September. So stay tuned. We are still working on trying to figure out how we can save that barn.
Okay, so the Park and Rec Board has not met since that field trip?
They have not, no. That field trip was in lieu of their regular meeting.
Okay. Any commissioners have any questions for staff on that topic? No? Okay. An update on the status of a historic preservation plan and survey grants.
At this point, it's status quo unless Brian has any updates. Okay. We are still, that is still something that we are seeking to work on. We definitely have had some staffing challenges and workload issues, so we're doing what we can.
Okay. I hear that. Last meeting, we did ask if the non-competitive grant application might be filled out by this hearing. So
We have had aspirations of getting that done, but we are working on seeing how we can get that done.
Okay. Commissioner questions, comments? Okay. Be great to get some momentum on the surveys. Thank you. And then Hpc Code Amendments. We may have another joint session.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Jennifer mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. That was the direction from the mayor, that we look at the calendar and try and set that. So I believe that's happening now, but I haven't heard of a proposed date. Now, council's kind of in the middle of our budget through this month. Yeah, it's this month. So I don't think it's going to be in September, but we'll let you know as soon as we arrive at a date.
Okay. I do feel like that first discussion was, back in August, was very helpful to get council and city attorney's office on more of the same page. At the moment, that leaves us essentially waiting for another proposal from city council, or from city attorney's office, that we can then truly sink our teeth into. Okay, any questions about the code amendments process? No? Okay. All right, then we'll move to comments from HPC commissioners. Do any of the commissioners wish to offer a comment? No? Okay. Comments from city council rep, Commissioner?
Thank you for your service. Good to see you all.
All right, thank you. All right. With that, I will motion to, or accept the motion to adjourn. All right, so, all right, adjournment motion by Commissioner Sibley, seconded by Commissioner Jacoby. All in favor? Aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
So, Commissioner Lane, earlier, you hadn't closed, I'm sorry, you hadn't closed the public hearing, that's why I asked that question. And then you said I could bring it up at the end. So I'm. I actually closed the public hearing at that point, so I didn't hear you then. Oh. So the owner just came up to me and said that he was looking at putting a breezeway from the house to the accessory dwelling. And so my concern would be that if those plans don't go out to the public again, it's not transparent. I mean, something very awkward could go in. I mean, the integrity of the man looks very good, but not everyone's integrity is going to be good. So there needs to be some notification process, at least to neighborhoods or people who came to the meeting, that now that it's been extended, here's the new plan that they're bringing, because it's not on the original stuff that we were given. And obviously, he's going to bring something new that includes a breezeway.
May not, though.
Well, whatever, whatever. That's all I'm saying, is that this meeting was in the packet and what the public was given.
So the proposed plans, the proposed plans for the garage and ADU would be part of the next meeting's packet. So it would be published exactly like this packet normally is. Staff needs to work, we need to work amongst ourselves as well as with the applicant, just to resolve some possible conflicts between zoning requirements and historic preservation requirements.
But you know it's going to be at our next meeting, right? So you've got notice.
Right, and it will be in the packet.
And it will be on that agenda
Because we can't
regardless.
just bring plans to the commission without them having an opportunity to review them in advance as well, so.
This is about a balance of, if we table this.
Oh, I get that part of it. I totally get that.
That's for the applicant's
So
benefit, so that they don't.
I'm just saying, anybody who was at the meeting tonight, if they could get the same thing in the packet when you get it, I mean,
It will be posted
email?
online. It will be posted the same way that this meeting packet is posted.
I mean, it's kind of the way that things always worked previously, and all of a sudden now they're not working that way anymore. It's
It's just
concerning.
a continuance. It's
But we
nothing
didn't even get a
unusual.
notification about the ADU as a neighborhood.